Welcome, everybody. Today is the 5th of August, I think. Yep. Nope, it's the 3rd. I got the wrong date. We'll just forget that on the slide. We'll just call it August 3rd. How about that? Today is August 3rd. It's Thursday. I was updating last year's slide and I figured it was one day off, but I went the wrong direction. Anyway, so today's August 3rd. We're talking about office space, which is a core topic or core session. I do these core sessions because we get these questions quite a bit, and they are the sort of thing that we put in a pre-conference workshop and sort of thing that people ask a lot about. So as I put in the email, if you got it, these are the sorts of things that particularly new consultants are asking about. And so we cover these, and I thought, well, why don't we just do 12 topics and do the same ones every year. So this is the office space one. We've also done things on fees. We've done things on, we'll do one on insurance, contracts, those sorts of things. So all the topics that seem to be critical, and we do those every year. Anyway, I know you can see my little Alt Tab action. Okay. I don't think I have anything terrible to put up there. Today, we're talking about office space. And just as a backstory on me, I signed a lease last week on Tuesday for 2 years. And this has been 3 years in the making. I've been in this office space for 5 years, and we've continued to expand, and it's been a headache. And I can tell you that the last 5 years and the previous 7 years before that, I've learned a lot of things about where I can set up space and different ideas. And hopefully I can share a lot of that with you today. And then after we're done, I'll stop the recording and we can chat about it. So most of us work from home. We set up an office right there in our space. And this is a tree house. When we put a survey out years ago, about where do you work, somebody says in a tree house in my backyard. So I thought that was pretty funny. They were obviously just making fun of the question, but I took it maybe it was true. I think they were joking around with the survey, but I took it quite to heart. And so I made this picture dedicated to whoever wrote that in our survey. But a lot of us work from home. I don't know what the percentage is off the top of my head, but probably 70 to 80% of our colleagues are working from home. And they have a little office set aside, or they work in their dining room or something along those lines, work in their bedroom. I see a lot of beds and pets in our meetings, so it's pretty fun. The reason we do that is the pros around that as well. It's affordable, it's cheap, we're already there, it's nice commute. One of the things that I want to encourage you to do if you're set up as an LLC or an S Corp, make sure you're paying yourself rent. And the way you would do that is you'd identify the square footage of your office space. If it's a dedicated room, you look at that and you look at all the expenses in your house. Check with your accountant on how to do this to make sure you're doing this right. But the way you do it is you look at all those expenses associated with running your house for a month, and then you subdivide the percentage of your house that's dedicated to your office, then you can pay yourself that amount. For me, it's $265.49. Although that probably needs to be updated because we've got more office space now dedicated in the house, but that's what it was. And that's what I pay to our family household income each month. One of the problems is you can't work easily with others unless you like having people into your house. When I took on my first colleague, my first employee, we were working out of my house, and it was just kind of weird, because we were across the hall from my child's room, and there was a point in time where I needed to go take a meeting, and it just didn't really feel comfortable for Tom to come back to the house. So that was the point in time where I decided I needed, a dedicated office space. As you can see, your kids or your spouse or your dog, likely your dog, your mother-in-law will come and interrupt you. You are always going to be tempted to go do laundry or something like that. So you've got to be able to balance your time well, because you're not walking away from your home. It's hard to create a barrier there. So that's one of those things that happens. Another option that people take are coffee shops or libraries. Those are certainly still affordable. You can get free Wi-Fi out of that situation. That's a good idea for when you're on the road. By the way, libraries are a great idea. If you need to hold a meeting with somebody, or if you need to hold a meeting with a handful of people, I've done this with control groups. If in another town, I'll set up a meeting in a library, and usually it's free. Sometimes they'll charge me a small amount, but even the most they'd ever charge is probably less than it would cost to get a room somewhere else, like at a hotel or something like that. If you're at Starbucks, you're going to be buying coffee, and so there's an added cost there, or a lunch. You have a problem with privacy here, and you certainly have a problem with like storage. You can't. It's after a while, if you're showing up every single day, it's probably going to feel awkward. Maybe it's fine, but it's probably not a long-term solution. Certainly a good solution while you're on the road. Or if you just need to get out of the house for a little bit, maybe that's a good idea. And I'm certainly very interested to see what people do with this group. There's the next step, and in many ways what we're talking about is what people do as they progress into different situations. If you need a place outside of your home that's dedicated to your work, people will do a co-working space. Side note, I'm actually looking into building a co-working space in our community for this very reason, because I think there's a lot of need for it, and I think it's a great opportunity, and it's probably an underserved market. But we'll get into that in a little bit. One of the reasons this is great is it's usually affordable. It's a lot more affordable than owning your own office. You can have some dedicated space. You can upgrade or downgrade your space. I put that in quote marks because when you upgrade and downgrade your space, you're actually thinking about you may have just a desk that you start with, or even maybe at a table, a shared table, a bit like being at the coffee shop that you're paying to be there, so you have free Wi-Fi. But you can move to a cubicle, and up front you can perhaps move up to a private office. I know my colleague Laura Keene, she has her own office in a co-working space, and so it's lockable, and she can leave her things there and all those things. You may get free coffee. There are certain places that have free beer, as long as that's not going to be a conflict with getting your work done, but that's nice. The things I've learned recently is there's oftentimes secretarial support, there's printing, you can have conference rooms for meeting with clients and things like that. You may find there's distractions and noise. You don't have complete control over the entire space in this situation. So you may have a lack of privacy or storage if you don't have those upgraded spaces. And for as much as there is space for meeting facilities, they're also, it's not your own space, so you may have to schedule it out and things like that. The next thing that people think about is leasing space. And so that's what the situation I'm in. I lease space in a building in downtown Edwardsville. It's called the Bohm Building, named for the Bohm family that built it 120 years ago. As you can imagine, and it looks nice enough, I'm sure, from your video, but it's a bit aged, and there's certainly issues. We just got access to a new room that we added onto our lease, and we walked in, and there's mold growing on the walls. So certainly not as nice as the space you see in the picture here. But you have a locked-in price for a leased space, meaning what you're going to pay per month. It's not going to vary that much. On the other end of that, you may be in a contract where you have triple net, NNN, the triple net of that. Oftentimes we have it set up as in a different situation where we pay a flat amount, but the net is three things. The net is the amount that you pay in your lease or your rent. You'd also be paying for all your utilities. That's the second net, and the third net is your taxes. If I'm wrong, I want somebody to correct me on that one, but I think that's the way I understand the triple net lease. But you'll hear that a lot. So if you're ever getting into a lease, you should know that term. Definitely do your homework before you go out and start looking at these things. We have CAM, community area maintenance. I think community is the right word. Common area maintenance, and the CAM is it's $4 per square foot, which I don't know if it's good or bad, but it works. Well, I've never done this, but I talk about the pro. You could sublease the space to yourself. So hypothetically, I had a lawyer tell me about this once. You can lease it individually as a person and then lease the space to your company for a greater amount. And that's a way to, if you have a bunch of extra money in your company, this happens, and you want to be able to get it out tax-free, that's a way to do it, as long as it passes muster with your accountant and anything like that. I certainly wouldn't just do that. I would let a lawyer or accountant take a look at it, but it might be worth your while. By leasing space, you can free up capital. And this is in regards to the next piece, which is purchasing space, because it's capital intensive to purchase a space or build a space. That way you can use more of your money towards developing your business by hiring employees or software purchases. We're finding out a lot about software purchases these days. If you're leasing a space, there's likely going to be a nicer location than the place you can buy because people have already built there. It might be in a place that's desirable, like downtown, wherever you may want to be. I talked about the triple net already. You're not building equity. Basically, you pay this money out and it goes out the door, and you're not getting an investment out of this. There's nothing that's going to come back on this. If I had bought a space 10 years ago, I wasn't in a position to do that. It would probably be worth twice as much in my community as it is today, just because the property values have increased that much. So that certainly would have been a nice situation. You may still have some upfront costs, meaning depending on where you are, you may need to build out a space. You may need to build walls. You may need to, I don't know. And so you may need to think about that. You're obviously going to have to purchase furniture and things like that. And you also have variable costs, meaning they may raise the rent. Lastly, we think about purchase space, where you build out your own, you own the space. It's capital intensive. That's the big thing. You're going to have a lot of upfront costs. The pro is that you're going to develop equity, as I was talking about in the situation. If I had purchased space 10 years ago, it'd be in a better financial situation. You have fixed costs. So if you build the fixed cost, meaning you have a loan or a mortgage, and the mortgage is this much per month. You know what that's going to be, and you probably set it up on a 20 or a 30-year loan. And so that's what the cost is going to be for the life of the loan. Well, until you renegotiate, because if you're doing it right now, your interest rate is going to be a lot higher than it was about 3 years ago. You to boss, meaning you own the property. If you want to tear down a wall, you don't have to ask for it, ask permission, unless there's some sort of building code that you don't know about. And the beautiful part, and the reason why I'm thinking about purchasing and building space, is you can lease space to others, meaning you can make income off of your space. Before I get into cons, the other pro is frankly what most people do. I've learned this through lawyers, is they purchase the property under a private LLC that they own, right, as individuals, and then they lease the space back to their business. And so that's a good situation for the owners of the building. So you are now the owners, and so you can separate the risks involved with those two sorts of things. So if I were to do this, my wife and I would build a building as individuals, and we'd lease the space to Goshen. We'd also lease space to other people. And so at some point I could separate from Goshen because I get old and retire, and I want to move on with my life, go live in Boca Raton or something like that. Probably not Boca Raton, but anyway, I would want to retire, and I would still be able to own the property without having, and I could sell the business, and so they would be separated. In many ways, I think lawyers prefer it if a consulting firm doesn't own property. The con is you might have market decreases. Who knows? There's the opportunity loss is that you have to put a lot of money into an investment, and that money can't be used towards developing your business by hiring employees or other kinds of large purchases. You have all those upfront costs, and you're going to have the maintenance that goes along with it. Right now, I don't have to worry about the maintenance. If the roof falls in, I don't have to take care of the roof. That's the leasing company who takes care of that. And around here, I wouldn't be surprised if the roof fell in. Hopefully it doesn't happen while I'm still here. Now, one of the things I want to encourage you to do is think about creative ways. Those are kind of the key ways that people find office space, right? Other ideas include negotiating a free space with a client. So early on, I went to my client. I was kind of lonely. Maybe alone. I was lonely. I was looking for colleagues, and so I went to one of my clients and I said, "You have all this office space," because they had to go through a round of layoffs, and they had all this office space. Can I work at one of the desks? And so they set up a situation where I could work there, and it was great. It's kind of one of the staff members. And I was there 2 or 3 days a week, and the other days I was at home, and it worked out pretty nicely. There's also, back on that, it was a nice way for me to connect with them around potential new opportunities. And so we did create some new opportunities. And so it actually fed into my business development piece. Just ask around to your friends, colleagues, the people who live in your community or in the community where you work. Do you know of anything? And oftentimes there's opportunities that people haven't listed, and they're often pretty good situation. Like if you could set up, like if you have maybe your lawyer or your accountant has a big office space and they have an extra room that nobody uses, and it's an office that they're already paying for, so why not get $200 or $500 or $800 a month out of it, whatever they want to charge, whatever makes sense. So that might be a good situation for you and for them too. I actually also negotiated a space at a local university. I was trying to do some development with our local university, SIU Edwardsville, Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. And that was a pretty good deal for a while. It was kind of an inconvenient location, upstairs on the 3rd floor. But I had grad assistants at the time, so it gave them a space to work. But I did negotiate a space, and it worked out pretty good. They basically gave it to me for free with the idea that I would try and develop some things with their folks. And well, it didn't super work out, but it wasn't a bad deal. It was okay. You also may want to look around for other unused spaces and make an offer. So the space that I was first in this building was donated to a local politician who was running for office, and they subsequently won their office and they moved into a nicer office down the street. But I mean, frankly, the leasing company wasn't in great contact with the owner who had offered up the space, and they didn't even know the space was available. And I said, "Hey, this space down the hall is available. Can I take it over?" And they went, yeah, apparently you can. So their miscommunication was my advantage. So I negotiated a space down the hall in a much nicer space than I was already in for effectively the same price per month. Yeah, so here's 5.5 key office space ideas for you. You may want to wait to buy until you have 15% down payment if you're thinking about a purchase situation. Again, weigh your costs and benefits of buying something. If you put a bunch of money into building a building, that's money that can't be used by the business, right? But at a certain point, you say, well, maybe it's best to buy a piece of property in my community because likely it will increase in value and I'll be able to make some extra revenue and it'll be good in the long run. So if you have the ability to do it, but make sure you have 15% down, talk with your bank well in advance before you start making specific plans, because the bank will want to make sure you've got everything lined up. Pay yourself rent. Okay, so I want to do everything legal and on the books, but there's nothing wrong with paying yourself rent. Okay, so we as business owners have money in our businesses, and that's money that we've received, particularly if you're an LLC or an S Corp. That's how I'm talking about it here. And so we want to be able to pay ourselves money from our businesses to our individuals, right? And so without tax penalty, we pay ourselves a shareholder distribution. You got to pay taxes on that. You pay yourself for your monthly pay. You're on payroll. You got to pay taxes on that. If you pay yourself rent, there's no taxes on that because it's an expense. It's not income, right? It's an expense to the business. You personally are just getting reimbursed for the amount that you already have. So if you have an office space at home, make sure you're paying yourself your rent. If you have a situation where you own a space and you can lease it back to yourself, that's another way to effectively take money out of your business and take it to your personal end where you want it to be in the long run without having to pay as much or any taxes. Don't buy or rent more than you need, because you're going to be over, meaning you could potentially be over. You're taking on more than you need to. You're spending more than you need to. Let's focus on where you want to spend your money. Read the contract. Let a lawyer read through the contract. If you don't understand what you're reading, make sure you understand what they're asking for. There's little things in there like insurance provisions. Oftentimes you need to make sure those insurance provisions are aligned with your business. Make sure you understand when you have to tell them if you want to be out. If you want to cancel how do you get out of your lease? Can you get out of your lease? If you need to cancel your lease, do you have to pay them out for the remaining 2 years of your lease? The thing that I worry about is construction on this building because it's old and they want to redo it. And so can I get out of my lease if they decide to do construction? That's my worry. But other things along those lines, make sure you're paying attention to the little details of it. Nowadays, they have a personal assurance section that didn't used to be in these things. That means if your business folds because it just goes under, you can't claim bankruptcy and get out of the lease. You are giving a personal assurance as an individual. So that's kind of another thing that you got to be worried about, that if your business closes, you can't just cancel the lease. Now, obviously, you're hoping you can go back to your leasing company and ask, what are you willing to do? They don't have to do anything, but but if you are planning to move, let's say after 2 years, which I do, you want to go somewhere else, you want to move to a different location. When do you need to let them know by? Because there's oftentimes provisions in your contracts that say, your leasing contract, that say you need to let them know 6 months in advance, right? So they have their 6 months to start advertising the space. Or is it 3 months? Because if you let that 6-month window open or close, if it closes, then hypothetically, they have already initiated another automatic year on the lease. So make sure you understand that stuff. I got caught up in that before. I had a wonderful person leasing to me who was very understanding and forgiving, but I had no idea. He says, didn't you know that you're supposed to? I said, nope, had no idea. Think creatively, particularly if you're trying to get out of your house and you're trying to think of that first place out. Ask around, ask your clients, ask your coworkers, ask your friends in your community. Finally, use your social network for ideas, meaning check around with some of the people here, check out on LinkedIn what are some different ideas you have. Thanks for listening. Hey, here's our sessions coming up. This is today's session in Office Space. I got the date right on there. Next week, we're bringing in Emily Johnson and my colleague and consultant Katie Zitt to talk about QuickBooks support. I'm going to do my session on networking karma in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks. And then, hey, we're going to bring in Nina and Kathleen from I2I, Nina Sabari. She's the previous ICTIG chair. And so we're going to be talking about that. And actually, the one that I'm really excited about is August 31st. We're going to be talking about finances and fees from the ICTIG survey. This is the survey that was done last fall in October 2022. And so I know all the ins and outs, can't tell you about it until then. Sworn to secrecy until August 31st, but I'll tell you what the median rate is that people are charging across the country, what kind of differences in people's revenues and things like that. I don't know anything about anybody's identities, but I can tell you how basically the state of how people are doing within our practice. With that, I'm going to stop recording and we will go into the chat function.